We are learning a little more every day about what took the life of actor and comedian Robin Williams. The man was tortured by so many of the same self-doubts we all have. Getting older, no longer being wanted in a profession because of age, financial difficulties, substance abuse, and now it turns out he was also in the early stages of Parkinson's disease. It may sound trite, but it's real. Cases such as this are those we not only can, but should learn from. Welcome back to MidPoint. Syndicated talk host, the host for Smart Life, a member of the Politichicks, noted author, and one who has worked with suicide counseling and the suicide hotlines. Dr. Gina Loudon joins us today. Gina, thanks so much for being here again.
Oh, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Gina, we have to start here and just shake our heads because every day it seems to get even darker from what we are hearing from Robin Williams, now Parkinson's disease. And I've heard a lot of people ask, is there a connection between Parkinson's and suicide? But again, I'm not a doctor. I only play one on TV. The only one I can think of is it would just be for a person in such distress, such depression distress, that to know that your life is going to end so horribly, that would just be another twist that would drive someone to do something desperate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Ironically, I was at dinner with a group of Robin Williams' friends just last evening, and they were telling me that he'd become very despondent in recent months, that he hadn't reached out to them, that they hadn't talked to them. And then, of course, when the news of his suicide came, they felt horrible, thinking they should have reached out to him, knowing that he'd had years of battling suicide and not battling suicide, battling drug addictions and depression and those things. And then the recent news, of course, as you mentioned, of his Parkinson's, which according to his friends, they said that that they were aware that the onset of the Parkinson's had been very rapid and dramatic for him, and that, you know, it wasn't like the slower onset you'll see sometimes, but he was experiencing perhaps some forgetfulness and things like that were very disturbing to him. And so I think it's a real possibility, of course, nobody knows, that he just didn't want to have to go down that spiral. And that's a lot of times where people will resort, or think at least of resorting to extreme measures like suicide, when they feel like there's no way out of the hole they're in. And I think this recent news about the Parkinson's quite possibly weighed into his ultimate desperate situation that led to.
Maybe the thing that we're hearing here that I think catches me and a lot of people as well, now that he has died, there are those people coming out and saying, we could see signs, we could hear things. There are people now going back over various videotapes of past interviews in the last 3, 4, 5 years, and they're hearing him talk about death and laugh, talk about killing himself and laugh. And they're saying, you could see the signs. But we always seem to hear that. We always seem to say that. We can see the signs, and yet nothing ever happens. What is it, though, that you can really do? I mean, if somebody is there and they're affected by this and they're considering this, you try to intervene, but it doesn't work all the time. So what works from somebody looking at this and saying, I got to try and stop this?
Yeah, I think the first important thing to know is that if someone really is considering suicide, there are some warning signs. You know, not everyone is a comedian like he was, so not everyone's going to joke about death. That's not necessarily a sign, if you will. But the signs that we know about, as somebody who's worked in suicide, I've heard suicides happen on the phone. I worked at a crisis hotline, and that's what I did on my job, was fielded suicide calls all day long. And I know that there are a couple of questions that I always ask. Number one, do you have a plan? Because somebody who's truly suicidal will have a plan. And a lot of times, the thing that's confusing about this, they might have experienced a long, long bout of depression and detachment, but they might circle back once they've made the decision about the suicide. You might actually see a burden lifted in a way. It's odd. And so family will go, oh, they're okay now. They look, they're smiling again, they're feeling better. That might actually be an indication that they have a plan. They've decided when and where and how they're going to do it. And so what you're actually seeing isn't a lift of a burden, but rather a commitment and a decision and a way out of the pain.
If we start, please go ahead and finish.
Most people see suicide as the only option out of their pain. There's no other escape. So when you hear words like no other escape, I don't know how to get out from under this, I have no control, that's where you can worry that somebody really may be considering suicide, and especially if they have that plan in mind.
Here's the terrible thing. We always feel that it would be so difficult to commit suicide. How could anybody do it? It's got to be something that not a lot of people do. Well, here's the rankings of causes of death from the year 2010. And these are just some of the numbers that we can look at and some of the more recent numbers that we can find. The number one cause of death was heart disease at 24%, cancer at 23%, But suicide, it only came in at 1.6%. I say only, and that's really a strange thing to say. That was 10th. But still, almost 35,000 people killed themselves. It's the second leading cause of death for the population aged 10 to 24. And the fourth leading cause for those 25 to 44. These are people who should have their whole life ahead of them. How do we, and this has got to be, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, this has got to be depression in many ways. This has got to simply be that depressive state that I can't handle the world anymore, and we've got to be able to identify that and treat that.
Yeah, it is very hard to identify in treatment. Obviously, someone like Robin Williams would have had the best of care. And if his psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, support group didn't know this was coming, it does make you feel a little hopeless, if you will, for those of us who might not have access to those sorts of resources. But again, there are specific signs people can watch for. And then I think for people who go through those dark bouts, if we can talk directly to them for just a moment, first thing everybody should know is that everybody experiences some level of depression. And just because you've experienced depression does not mean that you're ever going to feel suicidal. But everyone for a moment has stopped and thought, my life is horrible. I think Robin Williams should be the example of somebody who had everything by material means anyway, and yet decided to take that horrible course. So it should tell people who are struggling with perhaps their own career challenges, their own interpersonal challenges, that, it's not always so much better. The grass is not always so much greener for even a megastar like Robin Williams. So that we have to go through these trials in our lives. And one of the best ways, one of the most successful ways, nobody ever wants to hear this, when I deal with people with depression, if they will go out and get outside themselves. All the books you read will say, do something for yourself, go to the spa, spend more time for yourself, spend more money on yourself. Actually, those things usually lead to more depression and things like alcoholism, because it's a Band-Aid, it's not a cure. Going and helping someone, going and picking up a service in your life is truly the way to battle back from depression. It feels counterintuitive, it really works.
I have to get you, Gina, before we leave, to comment on this, because not long after Robin Williams committed suicide, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences put out a Twitter, and they used a picture from the movie Aladdin, and it showed the character, we're showing it here, the genie, and it said, "Genie, you're free." People who are professionals are absolutely aghast at something like this, because they're saying that suicide should never be presented as a mean to resolve or escape one's problem. There are people really scared that that tweet, while it was meant well, it actually sends the very wrong message to anybody who may be depressed or considering suicide, that you can just put a smile on your face and be free.
Yeah, I think it was very irresponsible. But again, you have to give a little grace here. People are going to react. I think especially people who knew him, in the ways they're going to react. And one of the things about grief is it's very personal. So for those who actually knew Robin Williams, they have to be given the space to grieve, however clumsily, however politically incorrect. Sometimes that involves anger. Sometimes it involves saying things that maybe are inappropriate. I think, especially for his legacy, for what he gave America, it's a time to just say, you know what, everybody gets to grieve the way they want to grieve, because Robin Williams meant something to a lot of people in America, and they're not all going to grieve the same way. And that, you'll see that take place in families and everywhere else. People do grieve differently, and we can't be angry at the way one person responds to shocking news about the loss of their friend in the way another one does.
I've only got about a minute left, but I just want to go back and have you reiterate something you said a few moments ago. Everyone suffers from depression. Maybe that's what we need to understand. It is not something that is rare. It's not something that happens to the other guy. We're human beings, and it happens to everybody.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between clinical depression and bouts of depressive mood. And I think that people need to know that that feeling of hopelessness and depression does not mean you're one day going to be where Robin Williams was. And I just want to give people that reassurance.
All right, Gina, I want to thank you very much for being with us. It's always a pleasure. It's something that we need to start telling people about, and we need to make it very obvious here in order to help themselves. Again, thank you very much, Gina.
Thanks for addressing this on your show. I appreciate it.
It is our pleasure. As we show you a little bit more of Robin Williams, and we have talked so much about him and all of the joy that he brought so many people, it is unfortunate that at the same time we also have to put up that number that you see on the screen right now. We need to push this forward to a lot of people. As Gina said, depression strikes everybody. It doesn't make a difference what life you're in, what profession you have, or how well things seem. At times, it strikes everybody. And for those who need help, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, their lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. Having known many medical professionals over the years, having done many interviews on this subject, and talked to a lot of entertainers, athletes, people, I can tell you, it's true. They do suffer from depression, and you can get help. It's the most important thing. Stay with us right here as MidPoint continues.